So we're going to work the knit stitch. There's only really 2 stitches involved in knitting. You have knit stitch and purl stitch. And the knit stitch is the one that if you've ever knitted before, this is the stitch you're probably going to know the best. The purl stitch is basically a reverse of that. So we're going to practice the knit stitch on its own for a few rows. So to knit your first stitch, I'm going to get nice and close up to the camera for this one. So you want to insert your right needle into the first stitch. So to do this, if you've got the stitches sat in front of you like this, and this is the left side of the stitch and this is the right side of the stitch, we're going to be inserting the needle through the left side and then forming a cross with the needle. So I'll show you how to do that now. So you want to go in from the left side, just like that. And then you're forming a little cross with your needles like that. You see? So I've just gone into this stitch. If I pull the stitch down, you can sort of see the little hole there where I'm going into. So we're going in through there. And then you want to take the yarn and wrap it around the needle. So going round the back and between the 2 needles. So I'll just show you what that looks like from there. So it's just sandwiching in between those 2 needles. Okay, so now it's the trickier bit. So now we want to scoop the tip of the right needle forward under this left needle. So I'm going to slide it right up to the top of the right needle first. And then we're literally just bringing that tip forward and pushing it forward through there. And that's catching the loop that we wrapped around the needle before onto that needle. So now I've got a loop on the left needle and a loop on the right needle. Now this is a little scary bit. We're going to slide this loop off the left needle. So it might feel like you're going to drop a stitch, but because we've knitted it and it's moved across here, your stitch is safe. So that's our first knit stitch. So I'll go over that a couple more times. Oh, I've lost my cast on. There we go. Okay, so that is in from the same direction as the other knitting needle. And then you want to form a cross with the 2 needles. And then you're wrapping the yarn around the back and then over between the 2 needles. And then the tip of the right needle is going to come forward under the left needle, catching that loop, so that now we have a loop on the right needle and a loop on the left needle. So I'm going to pull the left needle out of that stitch and we have our first stitch knitted. So you want to take care that you don't have your yarn too loose or too tight for this. So this is too loose. You've got a lot of room there. You can see kind of through the stitch, there's a lot of space. So if I pull that like that, now it's too tight. You want to be able to move your stitch up and down your needle quite freely. You don't want it to kind of get stuck. So if it feels like it's going to get stuck, it's a little too tight. So you just want to slacken off on this yarn a little. So don't pull this one crazy tight. Again, that's the sort of thing you're going to get the feel for after you've done a few stitches and a few rows. The first row is always the trickiest, so don't worry too much if this one is a little loose or tight. It will probably even out after a few. Okay, so we're going to knit the next stitch in the exact same way. We're going into that stitch from the left side again, so both needles are going through the stitch in the same direction. Then we're forming a little cross. Then we're taking the yarn around the back, across the top of the right needle, going in between the 2 needles, and then you're going to hold, so you want to hold that yarn in your right hand as you're holding the right needle. So keeping hold of this yarn is going to help you when you scoop the right needle forward, because it's going to add a bit of tension in there and stop this loop from falling off. So if that's loose, you might find that your stitch moves around too much and you can't scoop it. So now we've got it wrapped, we're ready to scoop the right needle forward through the loop. So I'm just going to push it forward and there we go, through it pops. I've still got my loop on the left needle, I'm just going to pull the left needle out and there we go. So we're going to knit the next stitch in the same way. So we're going to do all of the stitches on your row the same way. So this is all knitting. So going in the same direction, wrap around the back through between the two needles, and then bring the tip of the right needle forward through that loop, getting the loop on the right needle, and then dropping that loop off the left needle. So that's left side, wrap around, scoop forward. So another thing to watch out for as well, you want to be working quite close to the tips of the needles. Everyone always kind of wants to pull their needles apart like this. You really don't want to do that. That's going to create loopy bits between your stitches, and your stitches are going to be like quite small tight knots. So you want to kind of let it sit close together so you don't stretch them, just to stop those long bits forming in the middle. So the closer together you can keep your needles, and the closer to the tips that you work, the better it's going to be. But there's another thing you need to make sure you watch out for. When you knit your stitch, make sure you move it from this very narrow section at the end just onto the slightly thicker bit. So it's not very far away from the end, but as you can see, this part of the needle is thinner. So if you knit your stitch there and then pull your yarn and then go to do your next stitch, this stitch is only going to be the circumference of this thin bit of the needle, and you need it to be the circumference of the thick bit, otherwise it's going to be far too tight. So you want to work as close as you can to the tips of the needles, but make sure you push your completed stitches past that thin bit. So let's demonstrate that knit stitch again. So it's in the same direction as the other knitting needle. Wrap the yarn around the back and across the top of the right needle, going between the two needles, then bring the tip of the right needle forward through that loop and then drop it off the left needle. So if I lift this needle up like that, you can see that's the loop that we're just coming through there. So you're just coming back through the loop. It's quite simple, there's no extra sort of twisting or anything. You're just going forward through there and then off the left needle. Okay, so that's the first row completed. You should have 12 stitches knitted on your needle. So don't worry if yours doesn't look like this. If it looks like this, it's fine. You just need to rotate it so that the kind of lumpy section is all in a neat row at the bottom. So you want to make sure this is always pointing downwards. If you try and knit your stitches when it's kind of twisted over like this, you might count one of these bits as a stitch by accident, and then you'll get a weird twist in your knitting and it won't sit flat. So you want to make sure that you've got these nice neat straight loops sitting facing you and the bumpy bits at the bottom away from you. So once we've knitted our first row, so when you finish your first row, you'll have your needle with the stitches on in your right hand. You're simply going to pass this across to your left hand and you're ready to work your next row. So we're going to do another couple rows of exactly the same stitch. So this is just practicing the knit stitch, and then we will move on to the purl stitch. So once again, for knitting, you're going to go into the first stitch in the same direction as the other knitting needle. Wrap the yarn around the back and across the top of the right needle, going between the two needles. And then you're going to bring the tip of that needle forward through the stitch. There you go. Onto the right needle and then pull the left needle out. So that's in from the same direction as the other knitting needle. Wrap the yarn around the back and then bring the tip of the right needle through that gap towards you. So in, around and forward. So doing this is going to create a nice bumpy textured fabric that is called garter stitch. So the process of knitting every single stitch on every single row is called garter stitch.